sometimes I'm very worried about the state of affairs, um, the deliberate sowing of hate and discontent and disruption, innies and outies, attitudes that are being promoted in our present society. But in the long span of history, it's not the first time, and solutions were derived for ensuring the regaining of the forward progress and even stepping it up uh, from where we found it. And I try to keep myself convinced that this is just one of those interludes, and we're called upon to be our best self and to work as hard as we possibly can uh, every time for every opportunity, and live for the best, and the best will occur.
Hello, and welcome to Student Affairs Now. I'm your host, Keith Edwards. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Harold Cheatham. Harold was the 56th president of ACPA and the first African American man to hold that leadership role. He joined ACPA in 1970, when he was a doctoral student and graduate assistant to Ann Pruitt, then ACPA secretary, and later the 37th president. Harold's writing and research address multicultural counseling theory and practice, cultural pluralism, and psychosocial development of African Americans in U.S. higher ed. He is currently the Dean Emeritus and Professor Emeritus of Counseling and Educational Leadership at Clemson. I'm so glad to be in this conversation with you as we get going here in just a minute. But first, Student Affairs Now is the premier podcast and online learning community for thousands of us who work in, alongside, or adjacent to the field of higher education and student affairs. We release new episodes every week on Wednesdays. Find details about this episode or browse our archives at studentaffairsnow.com. This episode is sponsored by Evolve. Evolve helps higher ed senior leaders release fear, gain courage, and take action for transformational leadership through a personalized, cohort-based virtual executive leadership development experience. And also Huron. Huron's education and research experts help institutions transform their strategy, operations, technology, and culture to foster innovation, financial health, and student success. As I mentioned, I'm your host, Keith Edwards. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a speaker, author, and coach, and I help higher ed leaders create transformation for better tomorrows through leadership, learning, and equity. You can find out more about me at keithedwards.com. And I'm recording this from my home in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is at the intersections of the current and ancestral homelands of both the Dakota and the Ojibwe peoples. But let's turn to our featured guest today, Dr. Harold Cheatham. Welcome. Thank you for being here. You were here as part of our ACPA 100 episode that we recorded on stage at the ACPA 100th anniversary with Stephen John Quay and Susan Kovaves and Denny Roberts. And so we're here to have the encore conversation and put all of the attention on you, which I know is something you don't enjoy at all. But thank you for doing it anyway. But why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your journey and your career?
Thanks for connecting this to our ACPA 100th, because I'm here today because Denny Roberts and I had coffee at his invitation a couple of weeks ago here in Clemson. And as we were chatting, he said, well, that needs to be recorded also. Next thing I know, I'm hearing from Keith. So thank you. And thanks for the welcome.
But today we get to kind of look back at your career, both scholarly and in leadership roles and through professional associations. Why don't we begin? Why don't you tell people a little bit about your journey?
A little bit about my journey. It's an interesting, I guess, opening option. It was very long, intense, happy, fruitful, challenging, all the rest of that. And I think largely unpredictable.
Hmm.
Uh, how I got to here from there uh, probably defies everything that we uh, have in written text about vocational development, vocational counseling, and and advising. Um, I got here without a roadmap. I got here without a whole bunch of intentionality. Um, I got here by thinking that I knew where I was going at the beginning, selecting a career option, and then going where the path led me.
Hmm.
Uh, Seemed like I was going someplace else altogether. And in undergraduate school, once I had decided I was going to be a psychologist, in undergraduate school, one of my principal advisor, in fact, said, "There's a teacher in there, and if you hold still for a minute, I think I could help you to get him liberated." And she actually, frankly, pushed in. She took over because it was really at a point of advising class signing signing up for classes, and I was actually looking for my designated academic advisor when she happened upon me and asked me what was I doing there, and I told her, and she said, "Come in." Um, and at the end of 15 or 20 minutes or so, she said, "Now you go downstairs and tell him that I'm your academic advisor from now on." That was probably in my fourth or fifth semester. So she got me aligned with the teaching uh, block and got my credits and selections organized in such a way as that could go student teaching and then go look for a job teaching. Uh, she was a graduate of the University of Chicago, and she also had targeted me as somebody who she would groom for going to graduate school at or sponsoring. I don't mean sponsoring in that sense, but pushing me along to. And so one of the sessions or more that I had in her office was about the prospect of going straight to Chicago
Hmm.
for graduate school. And by that time, I was married and father in my senior year. Well, father my first year out, and that just didn't fit economically. So uh, going to graduate school didn't work, but going um, to teaching worked because I had a double major in history and political science. So I went off to teach in secondary school in upstate central New York, and saw a couple people in the guidance office and the guidance function, and I said, "Oh my God." And so I actually thought that I would go into counseling and guidance, and that's probably the only independent decision that I made about my career to go from teaching to preparing for when one of them retired or left. I would be prepared to go into guidance counseling suite and do what I was doing anyway.
Hmm.
I and a couple of other young new faculty members were doing most of the counseling and guidance while, um, frankly, the people who were responsible for it uh, regaled people in the, or attempted to regale people in the faculty lounge by uh, making jokes about students' problems in living. That's why I knew that I had to go to guidance and
Hmm.
counseling.
Hmm. You know, we hear so many people who get into student affairs either because they had a great student affairs mentor and they want to do to others what that person did for them, or they had a terrible student experience and they think this has got to be better for other people. It sounds like you had a little bit of both, right? You had, as you mentioned, some agency and some choice, particularly around this guidance counselor interest, but also some serendipity And I think what we maybe now would call intrusive advising sounds like somebody telling you what you should do and where you should go. And that sounded interesting and appealing and something you hadn't thought of before.
Yeah, actually, that's a good word that you use, Keith. Intrusive,
Hmm.
unapologetically, uh, because most of my experience has been that way, and that's how I think I've largely uh, conducted myself as a prospective mentor for students. If I see something that I think the student doesn't see, if I see something that they are seeing only dimly, I think it's my task. It's my challenge actually
Hmm.
to get in there and ask them, "Have you thought of?"
Yeah.
So yeah, I think intrusive is the right word, but um, as I said, I didn't do it from any kind of laid out plan.
Yeah.
Just like, okay, this is an intersection. Uh, what what do you do? And frankly, my career trajectory, my shifts of path largely have been guided by somebody outside of me saying, "Have you ever thought of?" Or "I think you'd be good at," or "Come watch me," or "Come be with me." Uh,
Hmm.
got me where I was going.
Yeah. Well, sometimes we need people to point out things we maybe never knew about or thought of or considered. And sometimes we need people to believe in us more than we believe in ourselves, right? See something possible. Where did this interest in guidance counseling, where did things go from there?
Actually, I went down to Colgate to prepare myself for the eventual succession into the guidance suite in the school district where I was in high school. And as I have said frequently, Martin Luther King was assassinated while I was on my way home
Mm,
from the interview at Colgate. And it was in the spring, uh, February, March, April.
mhm,
Uh, and by the time I got back to my secondary school job and got settled in a little bit, I had a call from Colgate offering me a full fellowship if I could shake myself loose from my secondary school job to come down to Colgate and work on the master's degree full time rather than part time as I had gone to inquire about.
mhm.
And I was able, fortunately, to make the arrangements to go full time. And this is recorded several places, probably, but what I discovered was that I was being recruited to Colgate, about the third hour after I was there. The courtship began, and it was pretty intense. Uh, Full court press, uh, encouraging me to consider staying there as changing my role from a graduate student in counseling and guidance to student affairs to assistant dean, uh, and not going back to secondary school.
Mhm.
And that lasted throughout my uh, program of study. And I give all credit to my suitors uh, because they said, "Well, okay, um, we get it. You don't want to come here, but you shouldn't go back to secondary school because uh, too few people like you are in higher education. We haven't been successful, but let us point some places that you might consider going instead of." And so they actually promoted my inquiries, which landed me at Case Western Reserve as uh, coordinator of the university counseling system.
Mhm.
And hence my meeting with Ann Pruitt and my trajectory on toward the PhD and an academic career.
Mhm. Mhm. And the Ann Pruitt name is a really pivotal one in your journey and in student affairs. And let's see if I remember this right. You were sort of mentored maybe intrusively, maybe this is another intrusive mentor um, by Anne Pruitt, and Anne Pruitt has roots back to the very beginnings of the student affairs field. Is that right?
Yeah, Esther Lloyd Jones at Teachers College, Columbia. She was mentored by uh, Esther Lloyd Jones, and I was mentored by her.
Yeah. So between the three of you, we've got 100 years of student affairs covered. No pressure.
It,
Um, how did Anne Pruitt and that connection and that relationship then lead into some of your ACPA leadership roles?
oh, that was easy. That was a piece of, uh-oh, that was a piece of cake. The when I was when I went to Case Western Reserve as a counseling system, there were 4 or 5 units on the campus. In fact, that my title was technically the coordinator of the university counseling system.
Mhm.
Uh, a long way to say director, or a way not to say director of university counseling, but essentially that was what it was, because in 1970, Case Institute of Technology at Western Reserve University had, I'm sorry, 67, had federated into Case Western Reserve University, and there were counseling establishments or systems or units in each of the colleges. And Dr. Pruitt was the director of the counseling unit in Mather College for Women. There was College for Women, College for Men,
Mhm.
Case Institute of Technology, and Western Reserve College. So there were 5 units. So my principal task was to make sense out of what what was there to create a functioning uh, university-wide and easily accessible counseling unit. And so Ann Pruitt was at once my guide and counselor and colleague and
Mhm.
mentor, because she was adamant. She and I, each time we've been able to be together, we have redone this history that goes back to spring of 1970, um, when she says that she was not as intrusive as I say she was.
Yeah.
It's kind of but she was intrusive, and I, I'll beg pardon of those listening this, they've heard it before, but um, my story and hers is the same. But what I heard her say is, I understand that you don't need a doctorate. I understand you say that you don't want a doctorate, but you're going to get one, and I'm going to be your mentor. So lower your voice, lower your shoulders, and watch my cues.
Mhm.
that that was Ann Pruitt succinctly stated, at least from the
Mhm.
recipient's
Mhm.
side. She said, "No, I was more subtle than that."
Mhm.
Love
Mm.
her.
And that led you into a doctoral program
Yes,
and then eventually into some ACPA leadership roles.
actually, I was a kind of tag along, but it was a long way from an ACPA leadership role.
Mhm.
Um, During those days in the late '60s and early '70s, there was a dance going on between ACPA and NODAC, and um, the other student affairs.
Mhm.
They'll kill me.
Mhm.
Anyway, as I recall, it was one of those early conferences uh, where they spent years uh, talking about creating a single unit.
Mhm.
Um, and I remember well, Anne was the secretary, so I did the Wallensack uh, tape recorder production of the minutes for the meeting. So
Mhm.
I was there during those meetings early on when there was discussion of creating a single student affairs unit. And my recollection is that the most intense of those was with women deans,
Mhm.
not ACT. And ultimately, after seemed like to me a year or two of in, intense study and courtship, not accident, it was not in their best interest to join with ACPA at that point. And so that was over. It happened a couple times more before we had the exchange of memberships and the ACPA becoming its own association out from under APGA. But I was, I really consider myself to have been more on the fringes, more on the border of this. I wasn't particularly interested in administrative or elected leadership in the association, but one thing led to another. And I never forget, I was sitting at my desk at the Coast Guard Academy in the early 70s, 72, 3, whatever, when the conference was in Cincinnati, and I got a telephone call from Betty Fitzgerald. And I said, yes. And she said, well, you were appointed to the editorial board of the Journal of College Student Personnel. I think it was called JCSP then. And I'm phoning to inquire whether you'll accept. And from there, my involvement and engagement in ACPA took off because I got on to the editorial board, and from there to ACPA Media Board, and from there into involvement and engagement with the establishment of, the disaffiliation from APGA and the establishment of the ACPA national office in DuPont Circle. I was president when that happened and handed off to Carmen Newberger as our first, our second, but our first, our first director of ACPA national office. And the rest is history, as tritely it goes.
Well, there's this theme of serendipity and also some intrusive saying, hey, you've been nominated. Will you do it along the way? And as you said, sort of one thing leads to another. I mean, I was a very similar doctoral student graduate assistant with Jeannie Steffes when she was ACPA president. And I showed up I didn't even take minutes. I handed out muffins and picked up trash and delivered fresh Diet Cokes, but I met so many different people along the way. And so there is quite value of just being in the room in whatever capacity and meeting people and hearing the conversations, and then other people connecting with you and seeing that in you. You sort of skedaddled right on through from taking minutes to being ACPA president and establishing a new national office.
I didn't actually take minutes. I recorded them on the Wallensack recorder.
Okay.
And I guess whatever transcription is, I wouldn't even claim that I transcribed them. My job was to run the Wallensack.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And make sure that reel-to-reel tape recorder was functioning and that there was an accurate true set of records of what was there. I don't know who transcribed them or whatever, but my job as a graduate assistant was to just schlep the Wallensack.
Yeah. Well, we mentioned in the opening that you were the first African American man to be president of ACPA. And I believe Ann Pruitt was the first African American person to be president of ACPA.
That's correct.
And you two were not far apart in your leadership roles. I mean, obviously you two knew each other, but do you want to speak a little bit to that experience of sort of breaking boundaries of your own and watching her do that? And I'm imagining that was intense.
I don't have any strong sense or recollection of barrier breaking, with exception to one disruptive incident in my knowledge. there wasn't much emphasis on gender
Mm,
and ethnicity. I mean, I was there as an equal professional. One of the reasons that ACPA is so dear to me because um, whatever your distinguishing characteristics, my experience was that there wasn't much made of that. It was like,
mm,
here's the job, here's what we're doing. Where do you get in where you fit in,
mhm,
as that song went. And while in some instances we weren't as aggressive, assertive, vocal uh, as we possibly could have been, I mean, to the extremes. That's why ACPA is as dear to me as it is, because there's a place for everybody in ACPA,
mhm,
and we may be slower than the um, than the specific population uh, benefits from or would have us be in fully incorporating them uh, and seamlessly,
mhm,
being a part of it. And I was I wasn't at all conscious of Anne Pruitt's ethnicity, that she was the only black uh, person or the significant black person at the meetings. We were there doing
mhm,
ACPA work,
mhm,
and only when somebody protested her being succeeded, or the prospect of her being succeeded by another black woman, uh, did race come up.
mhm,
And I, this is written someplace in I guess in my C, that person was confronted and I think effectively dispatched.
mm,
Mary Howard stayed on the ballot and became the successor president to Ann Pruitt. But it was a remark. This isn't verbatim, but it's close. That we can't have one black woman succeeding another one. Otherwise, people think this is a black organization.
mhm, mhm,
What a ludicrous uh, observation from a person in you know supposed to be there for humane involvement, engagement,
mhm,
uh, ensuring access and viability.
mhm,
Um, and so I really didn't have any strong sense about being a pioneer, the first black male to black man. Uh, I noticed the emphasis is on black man rather than black male. Uh,
mhm,
I I was um, mentored by ACPA leadership, and I think it had less to do with my uh, ethnicity. I'm confident it had less to do with my ethnicity than it had to do with my temperament,
mhm,
with my how I was perceived. Don Kramer, I'll call his name because he's one of the ones who was busy encouraging me to. It hadn't occurred to me to run for president of
mhm,
ACPA, but between him and Bob Brown and probably Denny, there was four or five of them. Um, and then there were ACPA colleagues who thought, the time is right. You have the temperament, the
mhm,
experience, etc., to provide the leadership. We're going to
mhm,
nominate you for, and in fact, Carol Carol Collier Cummings, I think is her name, the correct
mhm,
order, and Rochelle Pope stand out to me because they they were the ones who brought the message
mhm,
to me that you're going to be nominated for. And I said, I'm not interested in being president. And one of them said something to the effect, if not precisely, well, we've made our decision. You can make yours now. We're nominating you.
mhm,
And I got the word that I was nominee, a candidate for ACPA president. And so I sat up and acted like I was a candidate.
I'm so glad that throughout your career, there's so many people who don't listen to you, right? There's
So what?
so many people who don't listen to you. Who
I blame that on myself,
yeah.
not on them.
Yeah,
They
sure.
don't listen to me. I blame it on myself.
Yeah. But I do see this pattern of people really I think anyone watching or listening senses your humility and other people seeing so much more beyond that. But then that also being one of your leadership strengths, I think you're referring to your temperament as your sort of your humility as a part of that and your sense of wanting to be of service rather than being about you and you being a president and this pioneering and barrier breaker. You just want to be of service to the association and the people and do good work and contribute the way you had seen other people do.
Yeah. I was probably as surprised as anybody in Clemson history or upstate South Carolina the day after I was hired here at Clemson, and the Greenville News beamed Clemson hires first black dean in its history, whatever that caption was.
Yeah.
It hadn't occurred to me. I,
Hmm.
I looked at the job description and the configuration of the university and the configuration of disciplines within the college and said, yeah, I can do that. And I applied and I survived the process.
Yeah.
Got here and said, oh, it was news to me that they had not hired not any person who wasn't white in the top leadership positions in its whole history. Of course, I knew about Harvey Gantt,
Hmm.
being the first black student uh, after some petitioning to
Hmm.
be admitted here. I knew that history, but I just hadn't paid too much attention to the administrative, academic. I hadn't paid any attention to.
Hmm.
I knew it was down south.
Hmm. Hmm.
I
You
knew it
you
was down
mentioned this
south.
transition into this ACPA leadership role, and outside that one person sort of making a fuss and then being confronted, it just wasn't a big deal in your experience. Was
Right.
was the move to Clemson and the move to South and the barriers breaking there, was that also not a big deal? I mean, you said it wasn't a big deal in your mind, but what was your experience of making that move and being in that leadership role and doing that? Did that
Tell me that again, Keith. I want to make sure that I understand what you're
Yeah.
asking me.
Yeah. As you talked about these being the first black man who was president of ACPA, not really being a big part of what you were thinking and didn't really come up as much at the time in your role, in your leadership, and all the things you were doing in that leadership role and navigating. But then you also talked about this other barrier going to Clemson, breaking
Mm-hmm.
barriers there. You talked about moving down south, and I think you mentioned Denny Roberts a couple times now, and he said, I think your experience navigating that transition to Clemson, to the leadership role, to living in the South, um, there were some things to navigate in that journey.
Yeah, from day one to last day,
Mhm.
um, there's a challenge because of the history and climate and perspectives of people uh, who are here. Let me try to put this into context. One of my um, neighbors is a Clemson graduate. Lots of them around here have returned to here. He went to school in upstate central New York in the county or the school district pretty close to the one where we were. Last week, he said to me um, that he could not believe what he read in my Moments and Memories essay in the Clemson Emeritus College publication about the environment. And he said, what year was that? And I said, it was 1996 that we got here 25, 30 years ago. Um, but it's still the same Clemson. He said, nah. And I said, yes, it is.
Mm.
There, well, let me tell you what I took. My last official day at Clemson was Emeritus Day when we were celebrated for our contribution to the university and given a lovely plaque. The ceremony was we were on stage and chairs were in a semicircle, and the provost was at the platform welcoming us and thanking us for our collective number of years of service and that speech.
Mm-hmm.
When there was one chair, the one immediately next to the one that I was seated in, all of which had the names of the potential occupant in the seat when we got there in our caps and gowns to take the seat. She was underway, and stage right, someone was peering through the curtains, moving in and out and about and whatever. And ultimately, he decided, I guess, he had to sit in the chair that was vacant. But as he walked up to the chair that was vacant, he leaned over to me and said, "Are you in the right place?"
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "I'm so certain that I am."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But to me, that's exemplary. I mean, the sight of me being there at the Emeritus Day convocation, uh, he just couldn't fathom it. I presume he was from one of the external campuses or facilities
Mm-hmm.
that he had never bumped into me on campus and or read the newspaper or
Mm-hmm.
figured out that I was here. But the fact of the matter is that we're so scarce that a prospective colleague uh, would lean over and ask me in a specific ceremony if I was at the right place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't go away. It's
Mm-hmm.
there, and but if it precedes you, you're in trouble.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, you mentioned you were at Clemson. How long were you at Clemson?
5 years.
5 years in
Mm-hmm.
that leadership role.
Right.
Um, you were in ACPA leadership roles. You were in other leadership roles previously. I'm wondering, as you look back at sort of this collective, multiple leadership experiences, um, what are your big takeaways about leadership? You have expertise in counseling. You did a lot of ACPA work, but sort of above that, those details and competence was this leadership role.
It's not often that I'm stumped, but I'm stumped because I I just really don't think even having taught leadership theory. Where's Pontorado and Terenzini?
Mhm,
They're over my right
mhm,
shoulder here. I don't mean, I meant to say Pasquarella and
mhm,
Terenzini.
mhm.
Ponterado's over that shelf.
Okay.
Um, I, I don't give much thought to that. If something needs doing and you have perspectives, you step forward and engage, immerse, work it,
Mhm,
um, call on others with like skills or similar skills
mhm,
to get the job done.
mhm,
I just don't have any. I don't go looking for leadership roles. They maybe find me, and I don't hope that doesn't sound arrogant. Um, I, I probably, if asked to write a descriptor of myself, leadership I probably wouldn't put that word in there.
Yeah.
I just doing what he's doing.
Yeah. It reminded me, someone asked President Obama about what his suggestions were for young people who want to be in these leadership roles, and he said, "Get good at getting stuff done." And that sounds like like your approach. Get stuff done. What needs to be done? How can we do it? Very focused on that. You've mentioned Ann Pruitt. You mentioned an intrusive advisor. Uh, who are some other people who made a profound difference in your professional life?
Well, my academic dean, um, Rodney Reed at Penn State, uh, again, he probably was, I haven't verified this, but he probably was the first and maybe only in the College of Education, as far as I know, uh, dean of dean of the college, and he had a profound impact on my career because when he came to Penn State, and I was probably in my um, I don't know what year I was in. I had been there probably uh, 10 years in that department, and one of our early conversations after his deanship was he asked me that very question um, about leadership. And I said, I have responsibility for the college student personnel program in my department, but I don't have any ambition to necessarily be a department head. Um, I became one under his guidance.
Mhm.
It was a competitive spot, and it had to be selected by your peers. It was by vote, uh, but I never even fantasized about being head of the department.
Yeah.
Um, I did what they hired me to do with uh, my curricula and leadership of the college student personnel program, and I was happy doing what I was doing, but
Mhm.
I ended up being groomed to be to be a dean, and ultimately became one.
Yeah. Any
Now,
others who've been important to you in your journey?
there are a number of people, but some of them more intrusive than others, I guess. They don't come to mind, but
Mhm.
uh, immediately know in this conversation. But uh, I acknowledge them. I have to look in my address book and see who are the people who,
Yeah.
over the span of my career, I still send personal notes to, and and receive some from, also from
Mhm.
those whom I've had the pleasure of being intrusive with.
Hmm. Yeah. Sounds like you've returned the favor a time or two, right?
I guess.
Um, as you look back at your journey professionally, there's lots that we've talked about, but so much that we haven't even touched on at all. What's something important that you don't want to get lost? What's something important that you want to make sure gets said here today for others to hear?
Well, I don't know, to put it in a capsule. Um, a little while ago, I said, uh, get in where you fit in.
Mhm.
Um, and it's important, I think, to be flexible in your definition of who you are, how you're doing, and where you're going, so that you are susceptible to counsel, uh, to intrusive, to
Mhm.
intrusion, uh, uh, and and being flexible to at least consider adopting or incorporating what is suggested to you as ways that you uh, don't have to abandon what you're doing or where you're going, but it's all a piece of of who you are, where you are, and I think that's what has worked for me is that the intrusions that I have gotten uh, were more braiding
Mm-hmm.
than they were. Nothing was to my record. I don't recall anybody ever trying to counsel or guide me any direction that career wise that I didn't consider. And ultimately, apparently, from what I've been saying for the last however many minutes,
Mm-hmm.
I found utility.
Mm-hmm. I love that notion of braiding. I guess what I hear you saying is have a strong sense of self and identity, but not so strong that you're not open to feedback and other people's ideas and their suggestions, and be open to other people's thoughts and ideas, but not so much that you lose yourself in that. And braiding those together, this sense of self and identity with other people's perspectives and ideas and paths, um, that braiding those two things together, it's not an either or, but how do we connect those together? Yeah. And you started this by saying it was a journey that you never would have mapped out in the beginning, right? This is not a path that you would have plotted and planned. It's a path that you ended up on. As you look back on it now, what do you see in terms of the path that ended up?
Well, I was actually saying that in an academic sense in terms of plotting plotting
Mhm.
one's career path. Um, that's interesting. I'll have to work on that plotting and plotting. Uh,
Yeah.
uh, because some plotting probably is good,
Hmm.
as long as you know when to get off the dime and move responsibly into direct, to opportunities, options that are available to you. But uh, I don't know. I This crazy thing. If I had it all to do again, what would I do differently? Nothing.
Yeah. Because all of it shaped your experience and who you are and how it went.
It worked for me. Um, I pleased two proud parents.
Mhm.
uh, they gave as much career guidance as they could. Uh, they chastised me when the career path that I was starting off on or thinking about getting off of and on to another one. Uh, but uh, as I try to tell those whom I counsel, it really is a different world that they're inheriting. And so I might not know what the best career path is for you, but uh, if you do what makes sense and stay flexible,
Mhm.
true to yourself, using your God given talents, it works out.
Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, you have been emeritus for some time and you're still very engaged. You were at ACPA visiting with past presidents and other folks. You mentioned, it's a different world. Um, I'm curious what you see as the current of higher education and student affairs and what you see ahead. Anything worry you, concern you, excite you?
You know what? It's probably going to sound trite. Um, Sometimes I'm very worried about the state of affairs.
Mhm.
Um, the deliberate sowing of hate and discontent and disruption, um, innies and outies, uh, attitudes that are being promoted
Mhm.
in our present society. But in the long span of history, it's not the first time, and solutions were derived for ensuring the regaining of the forward progress and uh, even stepping it up uh, from where we found it. And I try to keep myself convinced that this is just one of those interludes, and we're called upon to be our best self and to work as hard as we possibly can uh, every time for every opportunity, and live for the best,
Mhm.
and the best will occur.
Mhm. I really appreciate that, especially now when what I see on the news and happening around us feels so immediate, so serious, so harmful often, as you pointed to. And I really appreciate that long view of history of we've been in these places before. It has been hard and it has led to some progress and some good things, and just keep doing good work, right?
Yeah, that's my sense.
Any final thoughts you want to add here before we conclude?
No, I I'm dry.
Well, Dr. Harold Cheatham, thank you so much for taking time to reflect and share your journey and for an entire career of leadership and service and seeing what needs to be done and getting to it all along the way. I was able to see so many people at ACPA who knew you and had connected to you or knew someone who had connected to you, and the impact of your professional life and journey was remarkable. And then also your wife with you following along was wonderful to see. And we absolutely must thank Denny Roberts, who we had a similar conversation, and Denny's outreach to you to have coffee and then outreach to me to have this conversation. So thank you to Denny for making this happen.
Let me close you out with a thought that you stirred. At ACPA in Chicago, my wife and I were sitting at breakfast, probably the third morning, down there in the cafe, and the woman at the table next to us stood up and she was looking directly at us as she was approaching us. She said, "I don't know who you are, but I'm getting ready to find out."
Mm,
And she sat down for a few minutes and we began chatting. I told her my name. She said that she knew my name, but who did I know? It turned out that her provost is one of the people who gives me credit for having some impact in her career. So she ended up, after having said, "I'm getting ready to find out," having really actually found out.
mhm.
And that's the value of ACP and of our
Yeah.
association.
Yeah. And someone who sees you at breakfast, doesn't know who you are, but thinks you're interesting, finds out that you have been a mentor and help guide a provost uh, who has meant something to her, right? So a little serendipity, a little intrusive advising along the way leads to quite a
And
legacy
our
and quite an
current
impact.
provost, actually,
Yeah.
this person is currently in a provost position, and provost to the person who introduced herself to us.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, what a great lesson to about our impact, but also if someone seems interesting to have a conversation and find out. I think that's great. Thank you for leaving with us. Um, Harold, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much. I also want to thank our sponsors of today's episode, Evolve and Huron. Evolve helps senior leaders who value, aspire to lead on, and want to unleash their potential for transformational leadership. This is a program that I lead along with Doctors Brian Rao and Don Lee. We offer a personalized experience with high value impact. The asynchronous content, 6 individual and 6 group coaching sessions maximize your learning and growth for transformational leadership. And Huron. Huron collaborates with colleges and universities to create sound strategies, optimize operations, and accelerate digital transformation. By embracing diverse perspectives, encouraging new ideas, and challenging the status quo, Huron promotes institutional resilience and higher education. For more information on them, you can visit go.hcg.com/now. As always, a huge shout out to our producer, Nat Ambrosi, who makes us all look and sound good. And thanks to all of you, our audience. Without you, this podcast wouldn't be possible. We encourage you to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube and to our newsletter, where you can get information about each new episode each Wednesday morning. You can also leave us a 5-star review and help great conversations like this one with Dr. Harold Cheatham reach even more folks. I'm Keith Edwards. Thanks to Dr. Harold Cheatham, our fabulous guest today, and to everyone who is watching and listening. Make it a great week.